What's up, squad? This is Brandon from the Bantu Sun. Thank you once again for joining me today. So, I want to hop on the topic of Russia is once again rejecting calls for a ceasefire. Now, this is major geopolitical ramifications, and you have to say this is probably Trump's most foiled foreign policy attempt. It is, I think they are absolutely bumbling the opportunity right now. And the reason why is because Trump did something he usually never does. He only does this in the case of Israel and Russia. And this is, he completely concedes his position. So with Israel, anything to get the Israeli hostages back. With Russia, Ukraine, anything to get peace with Russia. And this is very interesting for a person that really likes to strike a hard bargain. For instance, with Greenland and Panama and Canada, he's talking negotiate favorable terms with us or we're going to invade or we're going to annex. That's drastically different. There is no or else with Russia at this situation. And this is why I think Russia continuously drag his feet on making a deal. Since President Trump assumed office, his support for Ukraine has been lukewarm at best. And the Russians sees this, and the Russians sees that he wants a deal. But the Russians are jaded, and they know. I think the Russians were on the verge of collapse under the Biden regime. The nails were being given to them. The sanctions were slowly squeezing them like a boa constrictor, and Putin felt pressure. He felt pressure because there was only so much they can do. They were bringing in reinforcement for the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians were being tough, valiant fighters and resisting Russians. And although the Russians were significantly more powerful, they faced fierce resistance in Ukraine. On top of that, Ukraine was winning the PR war, etc., etc., etc. I mean, Russians had to bring in North Koreans. North Koreans. When you're bringing in North Koreans to save Russia, something's off, right? Trying to preserve the energy of his troops. And we all know if Putin cannot take Ukraine, NATO was going to continue to inch further, closer and closer to his border, as it's already been doing. Let's not forget, under Biden, also Finland and Sweden joined the NATO alliance. So you put all these things together, I really felt the Russians were in a tight spot. And then voila, President Donald Trump comes in and the sun comes out for Vladimir Putin and his Russian regime. Now, since then, there has been talks in the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, as they're looking to try to bring peace to this region. And right now, the peace is around the Black Sea region. The Russians basically have the Ukraine. This is what President Trump said. President Trump said because the Russians have strong military positioning, they're in a very favorable position to negotiate. But the reason why they're in a strong military position is because the president has been lukewarm with his support for Ukraine. If he had put American forces even more heavily behind Ukraine, that would have probably brought Russia to the negotiating table when they saw how lengthy and arduous this war was going to be. So you have this situation because they ally with Iran. Because you look at Russia as an allies, you look at Iran. Iran, what good are they? You see what happened with the fall of Syria with Bashar al-Assad. You have China, and China are infamous for being self-servicing, and they're not going to go defend anyone. That's why people send the North Koreans over there. So you have the situation where Russia was pretty much them against NATO, surrounded, chipping away in this arduous war, very similar and akin to Soviet Union versus Afghanistan, and how Afghans, American support for Afghanistan really whittled away at that Soviet powerhouse. Just because these long, arduous wars is bad for morale, it's bad for finances, it's bad for trade, it's bad for business. So that was about to happen in Ukraine. Now you have a situation where they're saying, okay, Russia has the Ukrainians in a disadvantage. Militarily, this is what Trump says, so Ukrainians need to negotiate. But this is a falsehood. This is a falsehood because America could push support for Ukraine and further bolster troops and technology and weapons for Ukraine. Now, there is a problem. Ukraine is infamously corrupt. In fact, before this whole Vladimir President Zelensky reign, where Ukraine is now seen as this damsel in distress being invaded by this big bad Russia, Ukraine had the reputation, the global reputation of being one of the most corrupt countries in the world. And who's to say and that's saying a lot. That is saying a lot. So a lot of people saying, well, American weapons are ended up in places like with drug cartels in Mexico, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, nobody can find like half the money that supposedly went to Ukraine. But that's irrelevant because that was always the case. Like Ukraine has always been corrupt. So you can't claim virtue now that we're, what are we now, like almost 10 years in a war. I think Zelensky came into power in 14, but it's been one issue after another, starting with Crimea. And then now on the eastern fringes of the provinces, the eastern fringes of the country. So it's always been an issue that Ukraine was infamously untrustworthy. But the situation is America put the battery in their back, and then the Ukrainians went for it. Now, Zelensky says, President Putin says they're not open to the truce right now because they're not getting enough concessions. I think what it is two things. One, Trump is dragging his feet. So if Trump dragging his feet, that means Ukraine is in a very vulnerable position militarily. And I think Vladimir Putin, President Putin of Russia, is continuously going to just crank the freaking screws on Ukraine, try to take as much land as possible, put as much troops in as possible, cause as much damage as possible. Because during this, what you would say, this pseudo ceasefire, the more land he can take, the more room he has for negotiation. Instead of giving up, having 50 kilometers to negotiate with, he now has 100 kilometers to negotiate with, right? So I think he wants to drag his feet because he feels Trump is his ally, and that the more territory that he can take, and the more military victories he can impose, the stronger he looks, and the more concessions he'll be able to get. The second thing, the other reason why I think he's dragging his feet is because he knows Trump wants to, once again, going back to Trump, wants to negotiate, is that I don't think Russians want to be caught off guard again. Now, one of the reasons why Russia has been able to sustain this war against Western pressure, and it should be quite notable, this is one of the great lessons of history. One, it's the largest country in the world. It has a bevy of natural resources, very self-reliant to a certain degree. Second, it had high reserve rates, high gold, high foreign currency reserve before all this went down. So they were ready. So they got, not only did they have the gold foreign currency, but they have a lot of resources. So they could always make deals such as they did with China when you have different situations where they're selling their goods in yuan. Because at the end of the day, they got resources that countries need, especially hungry countries such as India and China. And that's probably was the hardest sell for a pathway to peace for the West was, how do you beat Russia without China and India coming in and saving them through buying up their resources, which they desperately need. And that's been one of the benefits for Russia, is that they're right next to these countries. These countries need their good. So these massive populations have supplemented the economy of Russia despite extreme Western sanctions. Now, there is, of course, notes that parts of Europe have bought more gas than they have put in troops behind Ukraine. I do believe, yes, Europe was trying to get Ukraine to fight this war with American money, and Europe was going to claim victory. And now that's going to backfire on them if it hasn't already. That is true. But the fact remains is Russia don't want to be caught off guard again, because I think they were severely hurt under the Biden regime. So I think they're trying to get this ceasefire. What are they asking for? They're pretty much asking for the sanctions to be off. They want access to food and grain to ship to the world again, to their customers. They want to be able to sell the Black Sea. They want make sure that it's going to be complete sea. Their ship's going to be good to go unfettered on the Black Sea. And they want integration back into the global payment, SWIFT payment system. So they're pretty much, and the reason why I think they're going for all these things is because all these things are going to replenish their coffers. So that if Trump does backtrack on a ceasefire, now they're in a stronger position to negotiate next time, because if they're able to get their grain out, get their fertilizer out, get back into the SWIFT payment system, it'd basically be the equivalent of a boxer catching their breath in the late rounds. And therefore, if Trump does go back, or Ukraine does, Russia is like, hey, we just recuperated some losses. Because right now, you got to imagine that they've been winded after years and years and years of war with Ukraine. But if they get what they want to negotiating table as far as payment access and getting their fertilizer and their foods out to their customers and getting that money as well, I think they're going to be in a very strong position in round two of ceasefire negotiations. So it's very interesting. Like, I think this thing could backfire in Putin's face if he continues along this hard line. But then again, it's very interesting why President Trump is very determined to have peace by almost any means with Russia. I'll never forget that quote. He said, "Maybe the Ukrainians are Russians." Like, that is a ridiculous assertion. It's not even a ridiculous assertion. It's a ridiculous concession at such an early stage of the game, which shows you where his mind is at. And maybe American first means completely just giving up other countries. Maybe Trump said the world's a bipolar world, and Ukraine, you're in Russia fear. We can't do anything about it. And so it's going to be interesting, but the fact that Russia is not running to the peace table, I think, is very telling. They think they have a very strong hand to play here, and only time will tell. We'll see if they're right, or this whole thing might backfire, and the U.S. say, "Okay, Russia, we gave you an opportunity. Now, boots to the ground. Let's get down to brass tacks, and we'll just settle this on the battlefields of Ukraine." So those are our thoughts. I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you have any insight with the conflict of Russia and Ukraine, please comment below. You think we got it right? You got some questions? Go ahead and comment below. Also, like, share, subscribe if you enjoy the content. Until next time, take care. Bantu up.